Welcome to the annual meeting of the Disability Rights Bar Association. I'm Linda Dardarian, and I'm here to moderate the first panel. We have a second panel starting at 3:30. We have a break in between the two, and then this evening we have our reception at starting at 5:30 at the Royal Sonesta Hotel. Scott was just telling me what I was about to say. So he and I are on the same wavelength. We wanted to thank our sponsors for the conference and for tonight's reception. We got generous donations from the American Action Fund, Brown, Goldstein and Levy, Disability Rights Advocates, Goldstein, Borgen, Dardarian and Ho, LaBar Law Offices, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Metz and Harrison, the National Federation of the Blind, Relman, Dane, and Colfax, and Sam Bagenstoss, so that we could have a complimentary celebration this evening. So our session is called Telling Our Stories, Using Mainstream and Social Media to Message Disability Rights Struggles and Victories and Engage with Clients. So we're going to discuss how to use social media, mainstream media, how to make sure communications using social media and mainstream media, social media, are accessible to people with disabilities, and to make sure that these communications are consistent with ethical rules. So I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. I am Linda Dardarian from Goldstein, Borgen, Dardarian, and Ho, and I am also the Vice Chair of the Disability Rights Bar Association Board of Directors. Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin Powell, and I'm an attorney that focuses on parents with disabilities. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Haben Gurman.
Haben, do you want to say a little something about who you are?
So my name is Haben Gurma, and I work as a disability rights educator and advocate, and I travel speaking at schools and different organizations. My background is in disability rights litigation, but I now focus on teaching and education and consulting.
My name's Laney Feingold. I'm a disability rights lawyer. I'm proud to say I was one of the founding members of the DRBA when Dan and the NFB put it together 10 years ago. I do disability rights work with the blind community on technology and information access. And I'm an author, and I can't help but saying I brought 15 books to sell here. There's one left if anyone wants it at the end of the day. Thank you.
So I wanted to let all of you know just what an honor it is to have Haben with us today, because she had the opportunity to be speaking at the RightsCon conference in Brussels, Belgium today, but she chose us instead because she feels that we are so important to her and that we are doing such meaningful work for the community. So thank you, Robin, and thank you, Haben, and thanks to Robin and Laney, who really are like leaders in using social media to advance disability rights. Both of them have international followings and are very skilled at telling stories and getting them heard. I'm not, and so my role today is to be the mediator, moderator. So one of the themes that came out of yesterday's symposium was that we need to change the culture in order to preserve the rights we have and to advance full integration of people with disabilities. And one of the most effective ways to change the culture is through the media. We've seen how media has been used as a tool to thwart the full integration of people with disabilities by perpetuating the attitude that people with disabilities deserve sympathy and pity, or by propagating the drive-by narrative, like the 60 Minutes piece that aired in December, which was particularly frustrating because that story started out in 2015 as a piece on the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The crew interviewed a number of disability advocates and disability community members, including Laney and myself, And then they shelved the story and ran it a year later as a hit piece, which literally focused on the drive-by lawsuits and had a theme of how disability rights lawyers are just greedy and are only in it for the money. Our side was literally cut out of the story. And how did that happen? It happened because we were not in control of the story. They always had control, and they could use us and our stories or not use them at all, but they could do it any way they chose. So this panel is about us fighting back, us taking our stories and telling them for ourselves and making sure that our message is shared and hopefully shared widely. So Lainey, Robin, and Haben are going to talk about the tools for us to tell our stories and spread our word where we don't have broadcast networks and we aren't press agents and we don't have press agents and we don't have communications departments, but we can still effectively use these tools to share our stories. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to use different social media platforms, and we're going to kick it off with the current occupant of the White House's favorite platform, Twitter. So Robin, could you talk about the goals for using Twitter, what stories and messages are effective with Twitter? How do you tell a story using Twitter?
Sure, and as you said, Twitter is not just for Trump, so we should be active on it. I personally use Twitter the most, I think, in this area. I think it's just easiest to reach the broadest audience, and it's really important in order to successfully use Twitter, you do need to get followers, because if not, you're just tweeting to yourself. So I try to really actively search for attorneys in the field, disability advocates, disability organizations. I follow members of Congress. I used to follow the president, but I don't now. I actively make sure I don't follow the president now, although I check his Twitter occasionally to see what he is saying. I also try to follow legal scholars, law firms, and just others that are engaged in our issues. I also try to follow people that aren't engaged in our issues. So one of the things I work on a lot, as everyone knows, is parents with disabilities. So I actually follow a lot of child welfare organizations and advocates because I'm trying to get our message into their message. Twitter can be hard. It's really hard for someone who likes to speak a lot to say something in 140 characters. It's a struggle, and I think you really have to think about what you're saying. You can't just go out there at 4 a.m. like some people think and tweet. You have to really think about what you're going to say in order to make it coherent. I often will link to articles that I think are important, whether it's a disability-related article or something that affects people with disabilities but isn't mentioning people with disabilities. I think that personal stories are absolutely the most effective in getting our message out there. In many of the hats, one of the many hats I wear, I am the founder of the Disabled Parenting Project, and we shared a blog story last week by a mother with an intellectual disability who lost custody of her child. It's the worst story ever, and it actually it's our most popular blog post ever. So I think that just shows that personal stories are really effective. I think it's important to promote your work. So, self-promotion, it's hard, but it's really important to promote it. You also really need to promote others' work. You can't just be tweeting about yourself. And there's a balance with that. I think it's important to really use hashtags. There are a number of disability hashtags that I often will use, such as Crip the Vote or hashtag accessibility. And I really will search for hashtags to determine which ones are most useful for the topic. For instance, during the healthcare debate, there was hashtag ACHA and hashtag Kill the Bill and things like that. So I thought that was really useful. And it's really important to retweet others. I think boosting others is really important. Again, it can't be all about you. There are a lot of followers of people I follow, so you really do need to come up with a way to filter it a little. So I use lists. So I have a list for editors and journalists. I have a list for disability advocates, a list for attorneys, a list for scholars. So I just check those lists once or twice a day. And I do a lot of scheduling tweets in advance. I think that's something that is important. I can't just be tweeting in the middle of the day. So I do try to schedule them in advance. And I use Hootsuite, which is a program that actually will let you, they will decide what the most optimal time for reaching an audience is, which I think is really important. So I just do like auto schedule or something like that. And I think it's important that you tweet more than once, modifying the message so you don't make people crazy, but really trying to tweet the same thing in a different way, because you're going to reach a different audience every time you tweet, unless someone's on Twitter 24/7. And that really makes sure it reaches the most broad audience. I also really highly recommend participating in Twitter chats. I think that is a really great way to get engaged on a topic, and also consider organizing one. It's actually not that hard. I mostly use Twitter to engage in disability policy. As Linda mentioned, the 60 Minutes horrible piece really, I thought, got a lot of disability points in by using Twitter and really getting our position out there. And I think that Twitter is important for not only building your brand, but also really building your network. So I highly recommend it. And the last thing I was going to say is, it's really important as people are planning conferences to try to have a hashtag for the conference, because that's a way that I've met a lot of people, is just through going to conferences and using that hashtag. So I think that's something to think about.
Great. Thanks, Robin. Lainey?
Yeah, I agree with everything Robin just said. Everything. She only made one mistake. She did not tell you her Twitter handle when she started. So, Robin?
It's R Powell ESQ.
Okay, and mine is LF Legal. And when I do PowerPoints, I put on the front my email address and my Twitter handle. And that's a way to grow, as Robin said, the audience. So just a couple things to add. Robin did a great overview. One, I want to offer myself as a resource to all of you. I love DRBA, and I know a lot of us don't do social media. I've been doing it for a long time before I had the book, and then because I have the book, I'm now on more platforms. So I'm happy to help anyone. You can email me, you can tweet me, you can Facebook me. If people have questions, you know, as you decide to develop your social media presence, feel free to consider me a resource. Couple things. It's really important to know why you're using which platform. So Twitter has been amazingly effective and important in my work, but I wouldn't tell you should use Twitter. You need to decide why you're doing it. And so a couple of the questions, or some of the advantages of Twitter, because we're going to talk about the other platforms. Relationship building. You heard David Lepofsky was here, Canadian lawyer. I met David on Twitter, and he set up an entire week in Toronto for me and my book. And I know we consider each other good friends. We literally met on Twitter. So I know he always says, we met on Twitter, but it sounds kind of weird, but it was a really good thing. You can really form relationships through these platforms. And it feels like, oh, social media, what? You can act, I mean, I feel closer to Robin because we're on social media together, I know, and to many of you in the audience. So can you form relationships? I'm in digital accessibility, so accessible tech is on Twitter. Some fields may be less on Twitter, so Twitter might not be the best platform. Relationships. Business. We have literally gotten cases from Twitter. If I see someone complaining about something within the work we do, I will direct message them and say, you know, if you want to talk about that further, you can email me. Because we'll talk a little bit later about ethics. Never engage in any possible case-related dialogue on the main platform, but all these platforms have private channels. On Twitter, it's called direct messaging. And I don't engage there about cases either, but I will send a direct message and say, oh, if you want to talk about that further, you can email me, or here's my website, something like that. So we actually, one case that Linda and I worked on in structured negotiation, I saw someone complaining about something that I thought we could fix, and it turned into a whole great thing that we fixed a big Fortune 500 company's website because I saw that tweet. So, you know, what is your field? Do you think you could get business from the platform? Doing a public service. I think as lawyers, being on Twitter, we do a public service by sharing the legal perspective. That's what I've always thought. I tweet a lot about digital accessibility and the cases. I'll see something important on the DRBA list, and I'll put it on, you know, I'll put the public link on Twitter, because the community does not know about these things. So to test my theory, yesterday I put out the following tweet. Would you like to see more disability rights lawyers tweeting? About what? Hashtag disability, like Robin said, you want people. And then I mentioned 4 active members of the disability community, disabled people who are active on Twitter, because I knew that would help magnify the question. And here's some of the answers we got. So the question was, would you like to see more disability rights lawyers on Twitter? Definitely, exclamation point. Anything they can add from a legal perspective on policy, politics, and voting. Hashtag Crypt the Vote. That was one tweet. Seems to me awareness of employment rights, particularly of invisibly disabled folks, is an area of great confusion and uncertainty. So when we talk about ethics, we'll talk about, it's not like we're giving legal advice on Twitter, but we know about cases, we know about policy, we know stuff that the general public doesn't know. Another answer to that one was agreed. I've heard many horror stories relating to arbitrariness of what qualifies as a reasonable accommodation. Another person wrote, I'd like to see them, disability rights lawyers, help dispel misconceptions about laws like the ADA and disability rights in general. So, that's another reason you might, I'm not saying you should, but that's when you're thinking of the reasons, Twitter's good for that. Visibility for your own practice. Also getting, like Robin said, our message into other people. So hashtags, like there is a whole world of health technology that leaves out disability. And they have a hashtag. It's hashtag health IT for information technology. Financial has FinTech, about financial technology. I always try to follow their conferences. Whatever I see a tweet, they'll say, here's a great, financial website, and I'll say, financial websites need to be accessible, and I might link to something. And I'm not saying I'm educating everyone, but it's a way to inject our issues into the broader picture.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
All right,
for Twitter.
thanks, Lainey.
That's it
And
for
we'll
Twitter.
hopefully have a few minutes at the end for questions. So, Haben, how do you effectively use Facebook, and why would you use Facebook instead of Twitter to get your message out? How do you tell a story using Facebook?
So when you think about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media, think about your audience. We were just talking about Twitter, and for a long time, I didn't want to join Twitter. It sounded silly. Why would I spend time crafting 140 characters to say a message when I could send an email? Or they could look at my Facebook, or they could just go to the website. And I realized it's not about me, it's about the audience. There are some people who just go to Twitter, who just use Facebook, who just use Instagram. And if you want to do the most good in the world, you want to try to reach as many people as possible. There are people who are only comfortable using one format, and when you put your information on that platform, you reach more people and you teach more people. My principle for using social media is finding stories worth sharing. Not everything we do is worth sharing. So I think about my audience. What do they want to know about disability rights? How is this event, this link, this story interesting to them? And I shape the story, I shape the post in such a way that acknowledges what they might be interested in and provides it to them in as accessible a format as possible. A lot of people on social media have a short attention span. So we can help them by having our messages be as clear, direct, and to the point as possible. Shorter messages are better. It's really hard to do 140 characters for Twitter. So what I often do is I start out in Facebook. I'll put my story in Facebook. There's no character limit for stories on Facebook. So you can feel comfortable making it as long as you want, but make it direct, make it to the point. And I first post it on Facebook as clearly and directly as possible. And then I think about it, see the responses, see how people engage, And that usually gives me an idea of how to make it even shorter so it can fit into 140 characters to go on Twitter. So if you're using multiple formats, sometimes starting in one and then going to the other is really helpful. Facebook is a nice place to start because there isn't a character limit. So think about your audience. Find stories worth sharing with your audience. Facebook gives you several privacy settings. You can do it public, which is everyone on and off Facebook. You can do it just for your friends, meaning friends on Facebook, friends you're actually connected with on Facebook. So if you post something and you limit it to just friends, only those friends will see it. If any of your friends try to share that post, it won't be able to show to the rest of their friends because it's limited. You've limited the scope of that story to just friends. I don't believe anything you post online will ever stay private. So everything I post, I mainly keep public. Anything private, I wouldn't put on Facebook. And I recommend you also not put private stuff on Facebook. So that's the idea of sharing and stories. Make it for your audience. Think about their interests. Why is this Uber incident interesting to your audience? Why is this new law interesting to your audience? And shape it clearly and directly. People have the option of commenting, liking, and sharing your post. If you craft the story in such a way that you really highlight that this is a story worth sharing, your friends and followers will also share that story. And when they share it, their audience will also see it. And that way we create culture, we teach people, we get our important stories across. The only way we're going to change our culture and make it more inclusive is if we give our culture, give our communities and friends more positive disability stories. And we're the storytellers, we're the creators. And Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, those are our tools for creating stories to change our culture and make our country more inclusive. Sharing, liking, commenting, the more you engage, the more people will see the story and the more of an impact you'll have. Facebook has two primary account types. There's the personal profile, and then there's the page. Pages are intended to be more commercial. For a short time, I had both a personal profile and a page. And I tested posting the same thing at the same time on both channels. And I found that more people engaged and followed the personal profile compared to the page. And the same people, the same audiences were on both platforms during that experiment. Pages are intended to be more commercial, and Facebook would like people to pay to use pages. You can start a page for free. But if you really want your audience to see what's going on, to get access to all your stories on a page, it helps to pay to promote. You pay a little bit and Facebook will promote your story so it reaches all your followers on your page. Not everyone has the resources to do that, but if you do have the resources, you can do that. That's for pages. On the personal account side, you can have friends and you can also have followers. You have to go into settings and check the option to have followers. Followers only see your public posts. If you limit any posts to just friends, followers won't see it. Following is a useful way to get public information from a lawyer you want to follow, an instructor, a public figure that you want to follow. It's a way to curate your news that you get from Facebook. And following and friends both get access to public posts. Private posts limited to friends only goes to friends. On the page's side, anyone who likes the page can start following it. And when people like stuff, the audience grows for that page. The greater the audience you have, the more people can see your stories. And on the page's side, it helps to pay to promote those stories. And if you're someone with followers, you can have that same ability to connect with more people. The other thing about Facebook is with friends, you're limited to only 5,000 friends.
Only Haben is going to get close to 5,000 friends.
If you have followers, you can have many, many followers. There's no limit to followers. But with friends, only 5,000. So that's another reason to check the option to have followers so that you can grow your audience. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg both have following turned on and grow their audience through following and limit their friends to just people they actually know and have met. And that's how they use Facebook to share stories, and in addition to the regular news media. So that's the general summary of Facebook. There are more details on how to use it, but the idea is to have stories worth sharing and share it with your audience. Your audience consists of friends and followers. For pages, it's also followers. Video is very popular. Adding video will get you more views. Facebook favors original content on Facebook versus non-Facebook content. So if you provide a link to a YouTube video, the Facebook algorithm is not going to promote it as much as it would for an original Facebook video uploaded to a to the Facebook video player. And my interpreters are telling me my little dog is making noise. Thank you for letting me know. So if you have a video, you can reach more people if you upload it directly onto the Facebook platform. You could also add it to YouTube and share it on YouTube that way and other platforms. But Facebook favors original content. Add photos too. Adding photos, videos, links gets you more engagement, which allows you to share your story with more people, allowing you to create a more positive, inclusive culture, if that's your goal. Do Lainey and Robin have anything to add?
The only thing I would add, I agree with everything you said. And Haben, if you're not following her or friending her, you should, because her stream is great and interesting. Groups. There are groups on Facebook. So like in our world of accessible technology, there's a web accessibility group and a digital access group. And those are people who you can post right to that group. So if you feel like your whole group, friend or follower list isn't interested, and you can get the information from those people. So you can learn about your field in ways, and there's lawyer groups, there's a million groups, and you can search groups and you can find ones that fit you for you to share your stories and also for you to get other people's stories, because it's a two-way street. And if I really want to emphasize what Robin said about you got to boost other people, you got to appreciate other people, you got to share other people's stuff, and that is how you grow the community, so you have more people to share with.
Thanks, Haben. Thanks, Lainey. Lainey, do you want to talk for a couple minutes about LinkedIn?
LinkedIn. Yeah, I wasn't really doing LinkedIn until I had the book, but I have the book, and so I have LinkedIn. I guess about LinkedIn, I haven't been able to establish the same kind of interaction. Like on Twitter and Facebook, I feel I really have conversations with people, and I think that's one reason I have a lot of Twitter followers and a lot of Facebook, quote, friends. I haven't really gotten that in LinkedIn. I post things, just not that many people do it. But I really like the LinkedIn groups. Another thing, they have groups. They're hard to find. They redid the website. I don't know how. Well, first of all, if there's any accessibility issues on LinkedIn website, I know, and I know others in this room know too, the head of accessibility at LinkedIn. So if there's any issues, you can let me know. I can connect you. So if you can find the groups, there's a way to search groups, and like they have. I'm in the various disability rights groups. The ABA Disability Commission as a group. Since my book is about dispute resolution, there's a lot of dispute resolution groups. And I'm sure in family law and all the different areas, criminal justice that we're touching, there are groups. And I think that's probably the best use of energy in LinkedIn. And the last thing to say is, like Robin said, how do you find the people to follow and to connect with? And I think the fastest way to do that is pick someone like, Robin or Hobbin, and spend a little time and see who are their followers, who are their friends, who are their LinkedIn connections, and just click on the people that you think you have any connection with, and that's how you grow it. So, yeah, LinkedIn, I don't know.
Okay.
It's a little corporate for me, but I think it has its use. Again, you have to decide, why do you want it? I do think, real quick, on all of these platforms, if you're going to be there, you got to have a good profile. And LinkedIn, probably every one of you is on there because they put people on there who are like in the world. So you should look at the profile and make sure it reflects you, even if you're not going to use the platform. Have a picture that you like, make sure it describes you, link to your website. And a lot of people on LinkedIn, there might be someone at this table, have their name on there, but haven't spent time on their profile showing.
I shudder to think what the profile says. I'm going to have to figure that out as
It
soon
probably
as
says,
possible.
lawyer Goldstein Borgen, and doesn't tell about the amazing work that Linda does. So spend time on your profiles across these platforms. If you're going to be there, or if they have put you up there, make sure your profile reflects you.
Good, thanks, Lainey. Thanks for the warning. But I think we should all take that seriously. Haben, how does Instagram differ from Facebook? And aside from the fact that most Facebook followers now are older and Instagram users are younger. And why would you use Instagram to tell stories?
Your audience is all over the place. So if you wanted to share your stories with the most people, with the greatest audience, share that stories in as many platforms as you can. So there are some people who are just on Instagram. And if you just share your stories on Facebook, you miss out on the opportunity to teach and educate and share stories with people who are just on Instagram. So Instagram is similar to Facebook. It has a younger audience, but to this audience, Instagram is very, very important. They will often check the Instagram accounts of corporations, companies, lawyers that they are interested in exploring and learning more about. And they'll check the account to see, what is this person like? Instagram is primarily a collection of photos and videos. You can have some text associated with the photo and video, some text, a caption, image description, summary of what's going on. So people look at that to get a sense of brand, of story, of personality and character. And Instagram is a tool for us to shape our stories, our brand, our personality. And for the younger generation, it's really, really important to be able to get a sense of an entity before they go and engage with that entity. They'll do their research on Instagram and learn. So if you don't have an Instagram account or a positive Instagram presence, then you miss out on the opportunity to connect and engage with the younger audience. And the younger audience is our future.
Yeah.
So it's important that we also share our stories of inclusion and disability rights with this audience. Like Facebook, original video, and photos are very popular on Instagram. People engage by commenting and liking photos and videos on Instagram. Instagram now has a feature called Instagram Stories, where you can create a collection of photos, videos, and slides with texts or drawings that you create to create a sort of slideshow story to share with your audience. And it'll be available for about 24 hours and then disappear because kids like that. So that's Instagram. I've been using it for about a year. I'm deafblind, so I don't really get a lot from looking at photos. But I use Instagram for the ability to share stories with the younger audience. And people have been finding my Instagram, reading the stories, commenting and engaging with the stories. So it's a way to teach people. It's another tool for sharing our stories and teaching inclusion.
Thank you, Haben.
Don't you want to ask me what I do with Instagram?
Oh,
Nothing. I'm too old for Instagram.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be my answer too. But Haben has taught us that we should give it a try. So next we want to talk about mainstream media. And mainstream media, this day and age, includes websites and blogs, as well as writing journal articles and articles for publications, and having contacts with reporters, and letters to the editor, submitting stories to the New York Times, for example, which has this disability rights stories feature on its website every Wednesday. It's called The Opinionator. And it's in order to submit a story to the New York Times Opinionator on disability rights, you would write to opinionator@newyorktimes.com. And just this past Wednesday, they featured a story and a video of a guy in New York who uses a wheelchair, and he did a very compelling story about trying to use the New York subway system when you use a wheelchair. And he showed how the elevators aren't accessible. And so what happens when the elevators aren't usable and you're stuck on a platform? Well, he told a story about having to be lifted up and carried upstairs by other passengers. And if those passengers weren't there, first of all, it shows how not having that independent access is demeaning, and also puts you in the hands of, or makes you dependent upon the help of others. And so it was a very compelling story. Robin has had really incredible success with getting her stories out through mainstream media. So Robin, please,
Sure.
teach us.
Well, I have a lot to say, so I often will try to find places that will let me say it. So I have had a lot of luck actually writing for blogs and other online mainstream audiences. Again, I'm a big believer in not preaching to the choir, and so trying to get our stories out to folks that don't know about our stories and that should care about them. So I've had a lot of luck writing for websites like Vox and Huffington Post, Vice, Rewire News, and The Establishment. Most of them tend to be progressive-leaning sites. I think it's important, if you want to do this, you have to make contacts with journalists and editors. Just writing to their, broad email address isn't going to work. If you just send opinions at blah, 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 you're never going to get posted anywhere. Or at least maybe I wasn't getting posted. But finding these journalists and editors on Twitter is really important. Engaging with them, commenting on their posts. I corrected a reporter recently, and I got him to actually change the article because it was incorrect what he wrote. In reaching out and offering to write something, many Twitter profiles provide email addresses for pitching a story. So if you want to write a story or you want them to write a story, I will just send them an email. Again, I really want to be able to get the message out to the mainstream audience and get others involved. I'll often include some sort of call for action. I was able to quickly get something out in response to the 60 Minutes piece, which I found really outrageous, like most in this room, I would imagine. It's also important, I think, to be able to try to write for ABA journals and other publications. So I've written for GP Solo and Child Law Practice. Writing letters to the editor is hard. Well, it's easy to write the letter. It's hard to get it posted, I suppose. So it's a lot of work. I don't know the tricks to getting posted. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's really easy to put comments in under articles, but then you also see the outrageous comments that other people have to say. So if you ever write something, do not read the comments or you will feel horrible about yourself. Yeah. I say that with personal experience. Also, Linda mentioned the New York Times weekly series on disability. They actually also recently featured a piece by an attorney with a disability who talked about practicing law as someone who has a disability. She has multiple sclerosis and is from Boston, and she talked about practicing after her diagnosis. So I thought that was really exciting. And again, I think this is all really about just building your brand, being seen as someone who's reputable and authority on a certain issue. It's also really important, and I don't do it, so do as I say, not as I do, but to keep your website and blog up to date, and don't have a blog unless it's up to date. I had to take mine off for now because I don't do that enough. And also consider email blasts. I think Lainey's way better probably at that than me because I'm not very good at it. And then obviously, and I know Haven's going to talk about this, but make sure it's accessible if you're going to have a website and a blog and a email list, because I think there's no point if you're not. So I think that is really what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Robin. Lainey.
Yeah, I agree with everything Robin says. And since having the book, as I said, I'm trying to market more, and I have discovered that the American Bar Association has tons of magazines beyond ABA Journal, and all of our, Charlie knows, because thanks to the NFB, there's some disability awareness within the American Bar Association. But I feel it's been really random. Like, I just did an article for their Science Technology magazine on disability angle for the gig economy. People everywhere are looking for content. I often write for Law Technology Today, and they're always asking for content. Sometimes I put it on the DRBA list. We have to decide, because it takes a long time to write these articles. Oh, they have a banking I mean, everything they do, family law, they need our issues. And, you know, it's just one piece, lawyers, but it's a way to get them in. I think we need to decide. Maybe we could even, you know, DRBA, we could volunteer it. We could rotate, and people could agree to write one every 6 months, because our issues just aren't in these places. Family law, everything we talked about over the last 2 days has magazines and has radio shows and has TV shows, and the disability perspective is not there unless we put it there. And one thing I've learned just sort of overall is you can't be afraid of it. You know, you have something to say, try to get it in there. I have been successful in getting one letter to the editor in the New York Times. The trick for that, I think, was they published something that they did an analysis of a study on internet access for people. They covered the entire study except for the pages about disabled people and internet access. And so I could write them very specifically. You covered this study. I sent the link. You didn't include disability. It's covered on page 34 to 36. That was a big omission. So I think the more specific we can be, if we can point out something that was wrong. I've written them about languaging, like using blindness to signify ignorance, you know, or deafness to signify unawareness. So there's, you know, we're all consuming so much media. If we just would decide if we want to spend a little bit of time trying to inject our stories and issues, I think it's possible.
Okay, so thanks, Lainey. I've heard you guys describing all these different platforms and how to tell stories, and you know, I'm the one that doesn't do any of this, and I have a busy law practice, and I'm a litigator, and it just sounds like a huge amount of time, and it sounds very hard. So my question is, what's the point? Does it work? Is it worth it? Does it matter what the different point of view is? How do you convince someone like me to engage in social media? And why would I do it? So,
well, I've been trying to get Linda to engage in social media for about 10 years, so I'm going to pass on this question.
Go ahead, Robin.
Sure. I mean, I think it's important, personally. I think, I keep saying this, but it really has helped build your brand. It's actually given me business. People have contacted me after seeing something I wrote. So if you're looking at it from that angle, it does help with getting business. I also just really believe it. Whoa. Oh, goodness. Okay.
The camera fell over. No,
No.
luckily into the aisle.
Right. Yikes. All right. Sorry about that. I also just really believe it's important personally to be an ally to the disability community. Just not someone who's out there trying to get business all the time, I know, but I think really being able to provide service. I mean, we're saying that we're here to promote the rights of people with disabilities. We actually have to be an ally, and I think this is a way we can do that. And I think that that's what social media really helps promote. I also, again, I think I've said it a few times, but I think it's vital that we stop preaching to the choir and get our issues known. And I can't think of another way unless I stand on the top of a...
Try to convince me to,
Yeah, I'd love
and
to
others
add.
like me.
So, Linda, you've worked for many years in the disability rights community. You've done a lot of important work for our field. I think that there may be people in your community, maybe family and friends, who don't know about all your cases, or don't know all of the issues that are important to you. And if we want to change the world, we have to start with our own community, our own family and friends. So every time you win a case, every time a new law comes out that you want to comment on, if you used social media to say, hey, friends and family in my immediate community, this is important, and they share it with their own friends and family, and then they share it, then Linda, you'd be able to teach even more people about inclusion, and you'd help shape our world even more. So social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, those are all tools for us to use for our advocacy. It helps teach more people, starting with our immediate community, and when those stories are powerful stories worth sharing, they expand and reach our friends' communities and their friends' communities until the whole world knows what Linda's working on.
And not just me. Yeah. Thank you, Haben. I think I'm understanding the importance of this. But really, I'm kind of doing this jokingly, but for so many of us, it's just the consideration of the time and effort is a hindrance, but really there's a lot of opportunity here to get our stories out.
Well, also, let me just say, it's very rewarding. I mean, I already told you about David Lepofsky and my trip to Toronto, but it's not just that. I mean, it's real friendships and connections and feeling, as a person without a disability yet, feeling, embraced and part of the community. There's a lot of rewards to it, and again, decide why you're doing it. If it's not working, take the profile offline. It's not like you have to do it, but yeah. I think you might be surprised, those of you who haven't done it yet, at how really good it can feel to be part of the online community.
Right. So Sharon has a question.
Hi, Charlie. Yes, quick question following on what Linda was asking. Can this work if you do it, let's say, as your firm versus 10 different lawyers in a practice tweeting, but if the firm, just because of that time issue, can that same model work?
I would definitely say yes to that. And as a matter of fact, if I tweet about a success on, a court success, if it's DRA, looking at DRA, I can say at DRA Legal. But Brown Goldstein doesn't have a Twitter feed. And so if Brown Goldstein does something good, we can't, like Robin was saying, we can't boost Brown Goldstein because we don't, we could type it out, Brown Goldstein Levy, but you tend not to. And if you're not on Twitter and you're about to go, make your Twitter handle short, because that is going to count when people put you in their tweets. So don't have a big, long thing.
Okay. Charlie.
This is a shameless pitch. Content, and I'm on the council of the Senior Lawyer Division, which is now the biggest, really, division in the ABA. We put out a quarterly hard copy magazine called Experience, and a monthly called VOE, or the Voice of Experience. And in Voice of Experience, we use an issue editor and a topic subject for each issue, each monthly issue. And this fall, I was the issue editor and the lead author for something called Senior Lawyers with Disabilities. And some of the folks that you would know if you were, like, for example, the Commission on Disability Rights. Anyway, you might want to, I think it's archived on the website, but even if it's not, and it's surprising. I mean, not all 60,000 people are going to hit on it, but some will. And I was in a hardware store and somebody said, yeah, so-and-so sent it to me because he knew we were neighbors, and hey, that was a nice article you did. I will have to edit probably something else on another topic or something on a disability-related topic. And so I'll need to round up authors, and I'm looking at Sharon, maybe helping your disabled grandchildren get a good education. Would you like to write something like that? In other words, there are opportunities out there, even if you're not one of these guys who's really good on the computer or anything. If you can write or find some people and put together something, the ABA is the kind of audience, as I say, I've made it kind of a mission to reach it.
Thank you, Charlie, and thanks for the plug. It wasn't a shameless pitch, it was a useful plug. We still have a couple of other topics that we want to cover.
I just wanted to ask one quick thing.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Michael.
Michael Gilbert. And I guess this is mostly directed at Robin. And this is what I was saying before. I still don't understand what Twitter does that Facebook doesn't do. It seems to me that I've always felt like, and this is why I can't get into Twitter, it's like a Facebook status with a character limit. And that there's nothing you're getting out of Twitter other than maybe you'll connect to people you don't know, because most of us are not going to accept Facebook friends that are just random-ass people we've never met. But it's just, okay. I've never understood the appeal. And then the only thing Twitter seems to do is allow Trump to pontificate. So I guess my question is, what does Twitter bring that Facebook doesn't, other than Trump?
Well, Twitter was around before Trump won, so we can remember that. And it will definitely extend past his presidency, I'm certain of. So I think it's really important. I guess I personally think I use Facebook more on the personal level to post pictures of my dogs, but I can't imagine that the thousands of people on Twitter want to see pictures of my dogs, although they're really cute, so maybe they do.
Although I do like seeing the pictures of you and Elizabeth Warren on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, or me and Elizabeth. But I think I have been able to reach a broader audience using Twitter. I think that's just the best way. I think it's just easier to follow people on Twitter. I think I use it more professionally and Facebook more personally. But
great. Thanks,
okay, that was just a question.
So, Haben, we wanted to cover how to make sure that your communications are accessible. So Haben's going to address that.
So, accessibility is really important for disability rights lawyers. Unfortunately, there are some people in the disability rights field who post on social media without thinking about accessibility, and that's frustrating and ironic. So I'll start with each one. Twitter. A lot of people post pictures on Twitter. When you post a picture, add an image description. And Twitter has the ability to do that. So it's a little, there are several steps involved. You need to go into settings, enable adding descriptions, and then that feature pops up with your images. Once you add the image, so first go into settings, enable adding descriptions, and then for future pictures, you'll have the option to add image descriptions. And that will be available to screen reader users, blind individuals who are using Twitter. For your videos, ensure your videos have captions on Twitter. Videos on Facebook should also have captions. Same for Instagram. Facebook has the ability to add SRT and other caption files to your videos, and you'll see that in the editing process when you're in the process of uploading your video. Facebook has a feature called Facebook Live, which allows you to stream and broadcast video real time. That doesn't allow for captioning, so don't use it. Last year, BBC contacted me asking me to do an interview through Facebook Live. And I told them and talked to Facebook, and Facebook said they're aware of it and working on it. So BBC and I did the Q&A interview through Facebook chat. So we told everyone we're doing it through text, and that way everyone, deaf individuals, deaf-blind individuals, could also submit questions and read answers. So Facebook Live currently is not accessible. When you upload videos, you can upload captions with your videos. When you upload photos, you can add image descriptions, and that way blind individuals can access the content of your photos. When you're doing image descriptions, think about the story. What's the point of this picture? You don't need to describe every leaf on the tree, but think about what's the story of this picture and use that to write your image description. So those are the main things to think about with Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Make sure you have image descriptions. Make sure your videos have captions. You can also create transcripts with both dialogue, captions, and image descriptions, kind of like a screenplay. And that's what I do because I have many deaf-blind followers, and I also want to be able to access the video from my friends and the people I follow. So transcripts, captioning, and image descriptions for videos and photos.
Let me just add one quick thing, podcasts. We haven't mentioned podcasts. A lot of people have podcasts. They're also looking for content. So, for example, they have this law school toolbox. They get a lot of attention with law students. There's room for our issues. And every podcast I do and every radio station I'm on, I insist that there be a transcript posted right with the audio, or else I won't do it. And I've gotten several podcast companies to, podcast people to start doing transcripts for everything. So we have to be, as they say, the change we want to see, and make sure that when we're putting stuff up or other people are featuring us, they're featuring us in accessible ways.
Great, thanks, Lainey. Thanks, Haben. Lainey, do you want to just spend a couple minutes talking about making our own websites accessible?
Wait, can I just ask a question?
sure.
Sorry, about the captioning and the accessibility. This is Nancy Allisberg from it's okay, Nancy Allisberg from the Connecticut P&A. I actually have the opposite problem, and I feel so weird talking about it, but I follow the Connecticut Association of the Deaf on Facebook, and I'm friends with their president and other people. When they put up videos on Facebook, they're not captioned, but they're signed. So there's no voice. It's just a signed video. And so I've talked to them a few times about how those of us with the disability of hearing can't access their videos. And they keep saying, yeah, we know we got to do that. And I don't know if this is an anomaly, if this is something other people have seen, but I guess I want the communication to go both ways. So I'm just curious as to what you think about that.
Thanks, Nancy. Haben? Yes, go ahead.
Was Linda gonna? Okay,
No, I
I'll
was
go.
just passing. I was just saying, go ahead, Haben. Thanks.
So yes, just having sign language is not enough. The BBC tried to say the same thing. They said, well, we can have a sign language interpreter in the background signing what's going on. And I told them, British Sign Language? people in the United States are not going to understand British Sign Language. And deaf-blind individuals won't be able to understand that either. So captioning is really, really helpful because not everyone who is deaf knows sign language. Hearing people and blind people also want to be able to access the content of those videos. So make sure you really do have text, captioning, and image descriptions for photos so you can reach the largest number of people.
On the accessible website issue, since we have a short amount of time, I just say that the standard to make a website accessible is called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. In our agreements that the NFB does and that we do in structured negotiation, Department of Justice, they use 2.0 AA, and that is a standard that every disability rights lawyer's website should meet, in my opinion. When you get a new website or you get an update, there's two important things. Put it in the contract that you want the standard, WCAG 2.0 AA, and put it in the contract that you want your website tested by disabled people before it's delivered to you. So I got a new website because I had the book. I have a wonderful WordPress developer who I love. If anybody wants that information, I'll share it. And we had in our contract that she would meet the standard, that she would have the site tested 3 different times by disabled people. You don't need to necessarily do it 3 times, but we wanted to make sure early and also at the end. And if you do those 2 things, you're going to end up with an accessible website and have a good accessibility policy on your website. You can take a look at mine at lflegal.com. And make sure that you're very open in saying if you encounter something on this website you can't use, email me, and make sure that your person who maintains it, if it's not you, knows how to meet the standard and test by disabled people.
Thanks, Lainey.
Hi, my name's Abby. I'm an associate with Brown Goldstein & Levy. I had a quick question about that. So I've been trying to evangelize the accessibility web standards with my computer programmer friends, and when I send them to do you pronounce it like WCAG 2.0? When I send them there, they go, this is gibberish to me. This is like, it's just a list of, and I don't know from computer programming, so I can't really tell what's useful to a computer programmer. So do you have any suggestions for resources for good-intentioned people who want to learn accessibility but are unwilling to plow through the apparently, according to them, impenetrable website that is WCAG 2.0?
Yeah, I'll put something on the list about that, but generally the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium promulgates those standards. They know their website is a mess. They're working on a refresh. They're having an internal dialogue about whether to fix it incrementally or wait till it's all fixed because of the very problem you just described. There's incredible resources on there that aren't the standards, but they have a video series that's wonderful that says accessibility essential for some, useful for all. And you can see in 30 seconds why captioning matters, why keyboard access matters. So yeah, I'll share some resources on the list after the meeting.
Great, thanks. So we also wanted to briefly address some ethical considerations when engaging in social media. So when direct messaging on any platform, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, your own website, email, avoid the unauthorized practice of law. So messages don't stop at the state border. They are national, if not international, or worldwide. So if you're providing legal advice on an electronic format or platform, that you could be practicing law in other states without a license. So you really don't want to be giving out legal advice through any of these platforms, not only because you could be subject to the ethical rules of your own jurisdiction, but also the jurisdiction of the recipient of the message or the person that's reading your post. You also could be inadvertently creating an attorney-client relationship. So be clear when you're posting something or responding to a question that's received electronically that you let the person who you're engaging with know that, or place on your post that you are not giving legal advice, you're not creating an attorney-client relationship. What you can do, which is something that Lainey and Haben and Robin were talking about earlier, is that you can provide general information about the law or about a case, so long as you are not giving advice or providing information about the law that is specific to a particular set of facts that someone is writing to you about. Avoid improper solicitation of clients. If your message or post is promoting yourself or your law firm, which most of our websites are indeed doing, then they may be considered unauthorized or unlawful solicitations unless the post or your website has a tag on it or the warning that it is advertising material. So you need to use those words, advertising material, if what your messaging is about seeking to retain clients or promote yourself for business purposes. Also, because a website is advertising material, and if a post is advertising material, then you have to include the name and office address of a lawyer in your firm who is responsible for the content. So make sure that you have on your website the identification of some lawyer in your firm who is responsible for the content. When doing profiles and promotions, I'm giving this advice to myself. Avoid making, make sure that any profile that is up about you is correct and accurate. I don't know what the LinkedIn profile for me states. It could state that I'm a specialist in some area of law, and that's an ethical violation because I'm not certified as a specialist in anything. I'm just a practitioner. So avoid using any words that indicate or designate yourself as a specialist or that you specialize in a particular area of law if you are not certified by a bar association to practice in that area. Also, don't create the impression that you're available to practice in jurisdictions that, or other substantive areas that you don't practice in, because that could be considered misleading. Have disclaimers on your posts and your websites to avoid some of the ethical pitfalls that I'm talking about. So list which jurisdictions you and the attorneys in your firm practice in, or that they're licensed to practice in. Use the words advertising material on your electronic posts. Identify the attorney who's responsible for the content on your website. You should have a disclaimer that says that when you, in the areas of your website where you talk about case results, you have to have a disclaimer that says that any results described here do not guarantee success in a different case or based on different facts, because that could be, without that disclaimer, your post could be considered potentially misleading. Put a notification or a disclaimer that your website is not providing legal advice, that you are not creating an attorney-client relationship, that communications through your website might not be confidential. And if you are linking to content on the websites of others, let the users of the visitors to your website know that when they link to that content, they are going to someone else's website. And if you're following WCAG 2.0 level AA, don't link to inaccessible content on someone else's website. So, Lainey, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I want to say just one quick thing about plain English. And there's a growing movement in the accessibility field to deal with cognitive accessibility, and the Web Accessibility Initiative has a task force, and there's going to be new guidelines coming out about how to make our websites more accessible to people with cognitive disabilities. So especially in the disclaimer, try to write it in plain English. Like, I say the language that they all say to say, and then I say something, you can look at mine, I say something like, this means that Lainey won't be your lawyer unless you sign a piece of paper. Things like that to make it easier. You'll see on my site, I have a simplified summary on most of the posts that is tested at 9th grade reading level in a Word document. I'm not recommending you all do that, but it's a AAA requirement of WCAG, which we're not recommending that you follow AAA necessarily, but it's just the idea that it's hard for us to put our language in plain English because we're talking about legal laws and agreements and all this stuff, but to the extent you can do a short, 2-sentence summary of what you're saying, or especially in the disclaimer, make sure it's really for someone to read to understand what does it mean to use a lawyer website. So if you can only do plain English in one place, I would focus on doing it in the disclaimer so people can understand. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. So we still have a couple more minutes for questions. Anybody else have any questions? William.
Hi folks, William Myhill, Burton Blight Institute. Thank you so much for this panel. I thought I might want to share with you just some data that I collected in a small study about people with disabilities and their use of social media. That is, in many respects, I think, affirming of some of the things you've said. And this really only goes to say that there's already a body of literature out there that specifically talks about how people with disabilities are using social media. And that might be something that would be useful for other attorneys to look into, because it can speak to you about what tools are good to use and how to use them, and who you might be reaching by those things. But some things I thought I would just quickly share that I think are rather affirming of what you've been talking about. This was a small study of about 100 individuals with disabilities and their use of social media. And a couple of things that we found was that the respondents indicated that using social media helps persons find and connect with other people with disabilities. That was 70% of the people surveyed. About 78% of the persons surveyed indicated that they use social media specifically to promote disability advocacy activities. And then another thing that was very interesting to me was the fact that 69% of the individuals indicated that they use social media so they have some control over how others see or perceive them. So this is sort of a very, very preliminary of a series of information that I thought I'd quickly share with you. You might find interesting. I'm happy to talk to you about this further.
Great, thank you, William.
Thank you.
Yep, one more.
Hi, this is Jessie Weber from Brown Goldstein and Levy. So I'm not currently a Twitter user. I'm definitely a step closer to going in that direction. I don't know about Instagram yet. But I had a question, given the ethical issues that Linda brought up. When you're posting something on Twitter that's, you know, an article or a new press release about a case you're doing, do you include in the 140 characters a disclaimer about it being attorney advertising? Do you include it in the link? How do you handle that? Has it not really been an issue on Twitter?
I have in my profile, a lot of lawyers do, the last line says, tweets not advice. Now, I don't know if that would shield me if someone came after me and saying it was advice. And sometimes when people respond, like I realize now that I have a lot of people, and I want more of you on Twitter because I'm the only disability rights lawyer a lot of people know. And, you know, someone last week said about the Enders case, and you know, it's not my field, so I knew Sam liked it, so it was good. So I put that on Twitter. And someone said, oh, I was concerned about this case, but LF Legal says it's good, so I'm going to change my opinion. And I realized, like, wow. So I quickly responded to that person and put publicly, you know, for more about Enders, follow, you know, we should give a shout out to Sam because he does a good job on Twitter, really good. But I put that out because I realized people were hearing me in this like real official lawyer capacity with saying something about the Supreme Court. So, you know, that was cautionary to me. And I quickly told everyone to follow Sam. But yeah, you don't really have time to put it, you don't have the space to put it in every line, but or you could link in your profile. Mm-hmm. The link in your profile, like mine, is to lflegal.com. It says tweets not advice, but you could have the link go right to your disclaimer page. Because on my disclaimer page, I think it says a Twitter feed is not legal advice.
Or
That's
you
a good
could put advertisement in the tweet.
In the profile,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Then just a follow-up question about that. You'd mentioned directly messaging people when they have problems, and I'm wondering, does that run afoul of solicitation prohibitions? I mean, I guess I know some states have different rules.
So yeah, different states have different rules. Personally, I would put advertisement in that. Michael.
Hi. You guys started off talking about the 60 Minutes piece, and I know that was a horrible experience. But I think we also need to continue to work with journalists and the media And I'd also like to suggest another area which I have found to be very powerful are documentary filmmakers who tell amazing stories, and there's a lot more of them are political now, and they're great people to pitch. And you know, my rule is I say yes to almost every reporter. After a minute or two, I can tell if they're not serious or going somewhere. But I try to, you know, spend a lot of time with the media. And I think I just think that when they write a story, it goes much further than when we write a story. So, you know, I just think we need to develop those skills too, and pitch those kind of people. Now they're reading your Twitter feed, they're reading these things, they'll come to you too. But you know, the ability, you know, they're really artists, and when they put together a film, it just changes, you know, big opinions. So I don't know exactly how to do it, but we should think about it, and maybe as groups or you know, when we have a great story or something, try to pitch some of those people.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
We could have a media committee of DRBA.
Well, actually, I'm not done. I was going to say, thank you for reminding me that I had more to say, Lainey. So we have a subcommittee on media outreach. I think it's mostly operated by Amy Robertson, but I think Shira is part of it too. And Amy has been trying to collect stories to put on a blog that she is gathering or establishing, and it's called Title 3 Stories. It's one word with 3 as a numeral, and she's looking for all of us to help contribute stories to the blog. She's also got a Twitter handle for it and a Facebook page for it. And the idea is that there will be, it's like a clearinghouse of stories to use whenever there's a media contacts us, or there's a, you know, a threatening bill in a legislature, like there happen to be all over the country right now, and especially in the Congress. So use that as a resource too. Other resources that are available, the Disability Rights Washington has a project called Rooted in Rights. That is a video, you know, short documentary project. It's very effective. They do, you know, really powerful storytelling. So there are, you know, aside from the main platforms that we've discussed, there are also some efforts within our community to put out stories. Also, Alice Wong has a group or a project called the Disability Visibility Project, and she is a phenomenal storyteller as well. So that's all we have time for this afternoon. I want to thank, just from the bottom of my heart and the limits of my mind, Robin, Haben, and Lainey for this wonderful presentation. Thank you. It was so helpful. One last thing. Someone left a laptop in the dining room. It's at the DRBA registration table. And there's also, someone left a blue umbrella with a duck-shaped handle on it, and that's here with us. So claim your belongings if you are missing a laptop or an umbrella.
And don't forget,
Thanks.
there's one copy of the book left.
So we don't have Dan, right? I don't hear him. Is Jennifer up here?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great, wonderful. Dan Goldstein. Dan Goldstein. He can't retire yet, you know. There you go. Well, folks, we're about 10 minutes behind schedule here, so I think I'm going to get this going. We're missing one of our panelists, if Dan is over there in the other room, if somebody could politely nudge him. What's that? Oh. Okay. Oh, inside the garage. Okay, okay, sure. And if you see Dan, okay. So, folks, we're going to get underway. Let me start by saying this panel will, and our business meeting will take us to 5 o'clock, at which time we will adjourn. At 5:15, we have transportation going from here to the Royal Sonesta, where our reception is located. The reception is going to be on the second floor of the Sonesta in the Hamden's room, which I guess, as another accommodation to all of you sighted people, has a beautiful view of the harbor and a lot of windows in the room. So we hope you'll like that. Now, the transportation is going to leave from the first floor, and when you get out of the elevator, go to the left, to the far left end. There's going to be a door into our garage, because we will pick people up in our garage. I guess it's still raining and all that kind of fun stuff. So we will provide the service of keeping you dry. Again, the vans will start leaving at 5:15. It's on the second floor at the Royal Sonesta in the Hamden room. All right, so this panel is to deal with our thoughts regarding what I called in the agenda here, the Trump era, and how it will change for all of us and what we do. In keeping with the last panel and in keeping with President Trump, I suppose we should have all tweeted this panel, but we're actually going to talk. And my idea here was to have an interactive discussion, and ahead of time I shared 8 different questions with our panelists, and I'm going to share them with you because I want folks to know what we're going to cover. But this is certainly not a limit on what we can cover. Not only would I like this interactive among the panel, but I would encourage all of you to participate too. So the first general question is, what do we predict disability rights policy will be in the Trump era? Question 2, how do we combat notification bills like those that are in Congress currently, and even throughout many of our states there are similar bills being presented? How do we take on the anti-class action type bills, like H.R. 985, which is making its way through the House of Representatives? What kind of judges do we expect? And in particular here we have Eve Hill, who testified earlier last week about Judge Gorsuch. So we'll have an interesting discussion about that. In this era, should we change our litigation strategy, and if so, how? Do we expect the regulatory landscape to change, and if so, how, and how do we deal with that? Assuming that Obamacare sooner or later will be repealed and replaced, how do we deal with the replacement? What do we need to protect particularly? And the last question I had drafted up is there anything positive that we can anticipate and think of in this era? Or will it all be simply fighting rear guard type actions? All right, so now I'd like everybody on the panel to briefly introduce themselves, starting to my left.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Well, I need your mic.
Oh, take it.
Hi, I'm Eve Hill. I'm a proud partner at Brown, Goldstein, and Levy, and formerly a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department.
Other side of the table?
I'm Dan Goldstein, otherwise known as Eve Hill's predecessor at Brown, Goldstein, and Levy.
Jennifer Mathis, the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law.
And I'm Matthew Dietz, Litigation Director at Disability Independence Group in Miami, Florida.
So the first question, what do we predict that disability rights policy will be in this new era? Who would like to start?
I'll start.
We'll start with Eve.
My basic response to this is, try as I might, I cannot get into the heads of these people. But I can tell you about what I'm worried about, or what I have been worried about, just based on where I was when I left DOJ and what's been going on since then. So I can expect the DOJ has traditionally opposed ADA notification acts for a variety of reasons, you know, from this whole thing is stupid to, well, that might be okay, but all the rest of it is stupid, to da-da-da-da. So they ask DOJ to comment. Congress always asks DOJ for its comments, and we either do so through technical assistance informally or through written comments that say, don't do this, it doesn't work, it's asking for something that's unnecessary, and so forth. The current iterations of ADA notification acts actually respond to a number of the specific comments that DOJ has made in the past. So the last iteration I saw didn't only covered physical access. So it used to say if you had any claim of a violation, you showed up with your service animal and they said no service animals allowed here, you still had to send them a letter and let them have 90 days to figure out whether no service animals were still allowed, and seemed kind of like a futile gesture to me. The version before this did that, but it also imposed criminal penalties on the person who didn't file a letter, which I think everyone recognizes being, you've got to be kidding me kind of moment. That's not actually a crime, and the latest version stops doing that. But I would be concerned that DOJ may now say, yes, ADA notification sounds fair to me, and may encourage actual amendments to make it worse than it was before. Now, I'm saying this based on not knowing any of the people who will be coming in as political appointees in the Justice Department. But that's one of the things I'm worried about.
Well, let's talk about ADA type notification bills, and because that was my second question anyway.
I'm knowing.
So what do we do about them? Jennifer, Dan, Matt?
Well, I'd say we've got a bunch of efforts going on. I think that we are certainly much more worried about that bill passing this time around than we have been in the past. We've been dealing with some version of this bill for 15 years almost, not quite. It's never gotten as far as it got until it got last year, got past the committee. Never done that before. This year, obviously, there's a president who'd sign it. There's fairly large majorities of, large majority in the House who would easily pass it. I think there's the Senate. I think we would do better. But we are finding that there are lots and lots of Democrats, people who should be our allies, that we're explaining, I think, basic civil rights concepts to, and who don't seem to quite be aware of what it means for people with disabilities. I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. Apparently the shopping centers are, and this is not really a ma and pa, it's interesting that I think the proponents of the bill keep spinning this is about small business, and it's really these, I think, significant size shopping center folks that are doing all the lobbying. But I think that we keep finding in these Democratic offices that they think, well, it's not really a big deal. And you're just asking people to wait a short time. The ADA is really complicated. These are technical issues. It doesn't really, I don't think they get that it affects people's lives in very significant ways. And I don't think they think of it as a civil rights issue, where basically there's no other civil rights law that I can think of where you would say it's wrong to discriminate, but go and do that. Like, we're pretty much setting it up so that we're guaranteeing that people will experience discrimination, because we have just taken away all the reason, all the incentive for covered entities to comply with the law. And so we basically said it's fine, and it's only when somebody is actually discriminated against that will trigger any kind of obligation. And that just doesn't exist anywhere, I think, else in civil rights law. So I think we have a hard road ahead of us, and frankly, I think one of our biggest problems in this era is that people are being pulled in too many directions. We're busy trying to get people to sort of fight the notification law, and everybody's busy fighting the destruction of Medicaid and the destruction of the Affordable Care Act. And so, you know, we have a temporary reprieve from that, but that will be back in some fashion. And so, you know, it's sort of juggling all of these balls is, I think, one of our biggest struggles. But we do have, we do have a lot of things going on in terms of both lobbying efforts. Linda talked on the last panel about the Title III Stories website that Amy set up, and I think we need to be more active in kind of sending that around to DRBA. Again, the idea is to kind of collect stories that will help educate folks. I mean, it sort of, they will be used to rebut these notions that, for example, like this is about really small technical things, like it's about the signs being the wrong color. And so these kind of stories, I think, show that's not what this is about, that these are real cases, that these have significant impacts on people's lives. And showing, I think, that, you know, this is not just all about these poor businesses that just didn't know any better, and if somebody just told them, then it would be fine. There's lots of stories about people, you know, giving notice and yet nothing happens. There's stories showing these are big businesses, not little mom and pops. There's all kinds of things that we can use these stories for, but that's, I think, a significant piece of the education. And so, you know, we need to get that out. We started sort of in concentric circles, and so if you have not put a story on when it was circulated from DRBA, please do it. There's like an email address, and it basically all goes to Amy Robertson. So right now, Amy is taking on the task of vetting those stories. I think a lot more of us are going to have to be vetting them soon. But we've started with the folks we know and trust, and at some point, it will go sort of more widely in the world. But there's some grassroots efforts going on. I think there will have to be a lot more grassroots if we want to defeat this thing, and certain states are particularly vulnerable. The states where all these lawsuits are happening, California, Florida, Texas, Arizona, you know, there are not really right now, I think, active kind of coalitions of people that are contacting the representatives. And so we just keep hearing over and over again, you know, their offices have heard from the business community and they haven't heard from us. And, you know, we're busy, we're all small, we're all underfunded, we're all struggling to deal with, you know, 500 issues that are happening now. So, you know, I think it's a significant issue. I don't have any great answers. I think we need to, you know, do a better job, though, as a community of sort of working together. And I think we need to really have more kind of hands on deck with some of these big things. Not everybody may see ADA notification as their issue. You know, I work at an organization that represents people with psychiatric disabilities, but I mean, I do this work because not only through CCD, through the coalition of disability rights groups, but also because any successful weakening of the ADA, I think, affects all of us. And really, if we don't stand together, we don't have our strength. Our strength really comes from all of the disability groups really supporting each other and working together.
Hi, this is Matt Dietz. In Florida, there was a new ADA notification bill that looks like it's going to pass. It allows businesses to hire an ADA expert to get into a remediation plan, which will be almost like a get-out-of-jail-free card. And it also puts in a new profession of an ADA consultant, a new licensed profession, and which, you know, most of these ADA consultants have thrown out because they don't know how, they've never drafted an architectural plan, they don't know how to price things out. So it is just another barrier to getting access. The scary thing about the federal act, what is it called? It's called the ADA Education and Reform Act of 2017, which just got into committee, is it requires you to identify the barriers that you're complaining about in order to sue on them. So if you can't get up the step, you really don't know what barriers there are other than the step. There's issues, there's ways in which we could attack it. I mean, when I was listening to Haben before, Instagram, if you just took pictures of people with barriers and tagged them, and people that face these barriers to take the pictures and just disseminate what the barriers are and how it affects them, which would be great. There's many other ways in which to do it, but I thought what would be great is some entrepreneurial attorney that makes an app where a person with a disability can take a picture of the barrier, have the ADA citation, and have a letter automatically sent with that. I think that would be pretty easy to do. And it would, yeah, but I have plenty of time to do it, John. But I do think it's a danger, but I think part of the bigger danger is even after the law, if it does pass, the suits are going to be limited to the step to the front door, and you're not going to be getting past the front door.
So, oh, Scott, you were going to say something?
No, go ahead, Dan. I had a question, but I'll ask it after you make your remark.
So, I think there are a couple of things to think about here. The first is that who we've had supporting the disability community in Congress and who's been on the other side has not traditionally been a D versus R split, nor has it been a liberal versus conservative split. And a lot of this is highly localized. So if all they're hearing from is the local Chamber of Commerce, we're going to lose. If they're hearing from Kiwanis and Rotary and Lions clubs in those towns, then we might win. And so, I mean, the lesson that we seem to be learning in a number of different fronts is local, 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 local. And we need to be able to do that. The other thing we need to do, whether it's the ADA Notification Act or some of these other horrors that are coming our way, is we have to make the economic argument. And for that, it's the opposite of local. You know, for those of you who haven't read Jane Mayer's Dark Money, I urge you to do it, because you see how incredibly effective it was to fund all of these foundations and think tanks to produce paper after paper after paper. And, you know, if the National Chamber of Commerce lines up on the other side on the ADA notification bill, we're gonna probably need something more than the local Kiwanis clubs to combat it in terms of why this is actually good for business to let customers in the door. And I think there should be some talk about, among the disability rights organizations, not the disability rights bar, but the disability rights organizations, about funding an entity that can do some of the organizing that Matt described so well and didn't have time for, and can fund some studies, because we're going to be under attack as a group, and that means that we are better at, if we hang together, than hanging separately. So those are my thoughts on the issue.
I have a lot more to say about Trump.
Okay, 1 second. Well, and I guess my question is, do we really know how many of these quote-unquote drive-by lawsuits there really are, and can we attach any figure to them? In other words, the problem, making the argument that the problem really isn't as bad as people are portraying it to be, and obviously beyond that, there are other ways to deal with serial litigators, and so, but do we have any idea about the numbers?
Scott, do we have any idea how effective they are? I mean, if they're actually resolving these barriers.
Well, that's the other allegation, is that they don't.
Well, but if they do, then it's, I think, very powerful that there are a lot of scofflaws out there, and these suits are doing a social good.
Yeah.
Scott, you've got Rick McPherson with his hand up.
Oh, Rick?
I can talk about the Minnesota experience because there's a bill that came up last year and passed, and now there's another one. And it's all coming out of the fact that the Chamber of Commerce identified one particular person who had a bad reputation in the patent area as well, and has since been suspended, went into this area and filed a large number of suits. What is not talked about is that the suits that have been filed have not been dismissed. In fact, many of them have survived summary judgment. Now, many of them settled, and that's what pisses off the business community. But I found it very frustrating in Minnesota that the disability community and also my office has stepped back and has allowed the Chamber of Commerce to turn this person into the kind of anti-poster boy. Instead of folks coming, I mean, in fact, this person had, for example, people in wheelchairs going into stores, restaurants in outstate Minnesota with video cameras, documenting the problems that existed. Now, there are other problems between this particular lawyer and his clients that I don't fully understand, and they're not part of the rest of the disability community. But the problems exist. And that's what nobody in Minnesota is talking about. They're just talking about, oh, there are all these suits and this lawyer's making lots of money out of them, without talking about the problems that are uncovered.
This is Matt Dietz. I actually did a radio interview on this a couple of days ago, and I said the biggest issue is that there's no other way for people with disabilities to complain. Right. And if there was some other method, and in Florida law there is. There's local ordinances and there's state law, and you could go through the administrative process and do it. And the aggrieved people will get money for doing that, except there are certain limitations, nobody knows about them, and the county facilities are underfunded. So even though there is a way to facilitate it without a lawyer, those areas are not funded, and that's something that I've been advocating more and more on in Florida, is to have an alternate path, just like an aggrieved party would have under the Fair Housing Act.
I think you make a good point, and I think one of the problems that's kind of arisen in this debate is that it's come to be seen that somehow filing multiple lawsuits means you're bad, as opposed to that there's a lot of problems.
Right.
And people are lumping together. Exactly. And people are lumping together. I mean, yes, there are some instances where people have highlighted where people have made allegations that aren't true, or people are doing this quote-unquote shakedown letter where they're sending something saying, give me $2,000 and I'll go away, and not ever intending to create access, and just intending to make the demand just enough so that the business will not will not want to hire a lawyer. But that gets lumped in with, and not all of that is necessarily a problem. There may be reasons, in a state certainly, where there's also a state claim for damages. You would obviously, might have a letter that demands damages, but that all gets lumped in together with, and basically the Uber message is that somehow, right, it's all about serial litigators, and that anybody who files a bunch of lawsuits is problematic, as opposed to that there's a lot of problems.
There's a player missing here, it seems to me, and maybe I'm dead wrong about this, but those are the organizations that are not disability rights organizations, they're disability organizations. I mean, where's the Muscular Dystrophy Association on accessibility? and whatever many doctrinal differences we have with those folks, it's in their interest to make common cause here. And I think we're more likely to reach out to them than they are likely to reach out to us. And they've got lots and lots and lots of money. And I think we should be talking to them about, you really don't want people with muscular dystrophy not to be able to go to a restaurant. And we're going to have to make new alliances.
Jerry's kids have to eat.
What?
I said Jerry's kids have to eat, after all.
That's right.
I just
well-
want to say Heather is there in the audience, actually, like setting up Hill meetings right now on this issue.
I was just going to say on today's Wall Street Journal, unfortunately, has an editorial on this very topic, very bad. I tweeted it, following Lainey's instructions. No one has noticed. Well, it was information, but anyway, so I shouldn't have tweeted it. Okay.
Well,
but I don't. But it basically has statistics, bad statistics. Without any reference to where they got the data. This is their own editorial, but it's very powerful, and I think we can't pretend that this is. They're basically saying that 80% of the suits are from a couple of lawyers who are in it for the money, and if we only, and so we need to do something about it. And I don't know where their data comes from or what it is. I think it's from some California. There are some people in California that we've been dealing with for many years who do tons of suits. Doing a lot of suits is good, and on one hand, but anyway, this is happening right now.
Is that supposed to be California, or is it national that they're?
It's actually national.
Yeah, they're talking about national.
Well, and this kind of legislation won't necessarily stop the serial litigators. They'll just figure out a different way to do it. They'll invent the technology that Matt was talking about and fire out tons of demand letters. Yeah, I mean, this is all silly. But you're right, Dan and others. We need to broaden the scope of how we are fighting this and really have the emphasis be that 27 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act came into law, thousands upon thousands of public accommodations, public businesses are just simply not accessible.
Is there?
And so we'll take two more questions on this, and then we should move to the other questions. We got Carolyn, I guess, is that right?
Yes, Caroline Jackson from the NAD, and this is just a really quick comment, but just to add to the negativity. I'll take physical access and raise use cyberspace. Recently, the UC Berkeley let the whole world know that because the DOJ had found that having hundreds of thousands of uncaptioned videos on their website free for everybody but the deaf people was discriminatory, that they were just going to take those down. And our clients got hate mail. Our clients got multiple just scathing emails. How dare you? This, that, and the other thing. And it was really scary. And I would like to look to how can we, the narrative wasn't even there. All our clients did was file a complaint. All our clients did was tell the government that this is a problem, and the government told UC Berkeley, yes, these people are right, this is a problem. And then UC Berkeley responded by doing something that would rile public sentiment. And it was discouraging, but it's all the more a call to take on that narrative so people understand that just wanting access is not too much to ask.
Who was the next person?
Ellen Seidman.
Ellen.
And I guess the experience I had from working at the New York City Commission on Human Rights is that, we're looking at the problem the wrong way. The problem is not that all these complaints are being filed, 80% of complaints are being filed by serial plaintiffs. It's that the majority of people who encounter these kinds of barriers don't file complaints at all. And, I think that telling more stories about people, I don't think that anything that any of us are going to do is going to be better, is going to be get attention any more than a story about some mom taking her kid to the restaurant and encountering a barrier, or, you know, taking your parents out for their anniversary and finding that the only accessible entrance is locked and, you know, and impossible to get through. You have to go through the kitchen or something like that. So I think even though it's inaccessible, the Facebook Live might, you know, some of these stories, but you know, Instagram and other things for people to tell these stories, because so many people, you know, if you have a guide dog or you use a wheelchair, you might be spending your whole life filing a complaint every day about like some barrier you encounter, and most people don't want to spend their time doing this.
Thank you, Ellen. So I think we should move on. Eve, you had other concerns, so why don't we just go there and then have a discussion about your next concern?
Well, that was the light one. It gets worse from there. So I expect the DOJ over the last 5.5 years, no, over the last 8 years, has been saying that the ADA applies to all the programs, services, and activities of covered entities, including arrests and incarceration and education and Olmstead in education and in work, and the internet and non-fixed equipment. And there's been pushback on all of those things. And DOJ has said them in briefs and in guidance, but not as much in regulations. I know, I'm ashamed. So I am worried that the protest against covering those kinds of things continues, and that DOJ may not be as willing to continue to say those things, to continue to say that arrests are covered. There's huge pushback about that by the ADA. That the internet is covered, we all know there's huge pushback about that. That the Olmstead obligation applies anywhere other than where you live, doesn't apply to where you work or where you go to school. That non-fixed equipment, because it's not covered in the ADAG, must not be covered at all. It can be anything it wants to be. And DOJ has said, we're going to regulate that equipment. We're going to give you standards for that, but it's always been covered and has to be accessible. That may not happen. All those things may be pulled back. So I think it's very important to keep pressure on to deal with that. Anybody else want to comment on that? Are you depressed?
I guess I would just say I worry not just that DOJ will pull back, but in how many, if any, of our issues will DOJ end up on the other side?
Well, that's
which has
my
happened
next
before.
So, okay, so we may have the might of the United States lined up on the other side, but look, there are 70 of us in this room. Actually, I think it's 68, but I kind of lost track over back there. We are going to need to make alliances with all kinds of folks. We had DOJ, so we really didn't need to be talking to state attorneys general. Well, now we need to be talking to state attorneys general. We were comfortable talking to each other. It's sort of the flip side of the aversive reaction some people have to visible disabilities. Maybe we weren't so comfortable talking to Kiwanis and Optimus clubs and so on. We're going to have to get over that and start talking to good-hearted people who may or may not completely get it, but they do get the equal access part, you know? They may regard blindness as a tragedy, but they still get the equal access part. We are really going to have to do some horizontal work and get new allies. It'll make a difference in terms of legislation. It'll make a difference in terms, you know, I don't know how many of you heard this morning when Disability Rights Maryland was doing their presentation about what they had done with suspensions and arrests in the Baltimore City school system. And on the one hand, it sounded like a nightmare to me because Alyssa put together this huge coalition and I just could imagine what those meetings were like and how little got done. But they kept meeting over and over and over again with the head of the school board and the head of the school police, and probably a geologic age went by while they were doing that, but ultimately the number of suspensions has fallen drastically and the number of school-based arrests has fallen drastically. We're going to have to do more patient talking with more people having our backs to more people with whom we have little in common. Because without Uncle there, we're in a world of hurt. And that's both for defensive action and offensive action.
This is Matt Dietz. I've been in Florida forever, and we haven't had a friendly government in Florida other than the feds for years and years and years and years. So I think building folks that I know that are favorable are, for example, state court judges that are elected locally that are a little bit more liberal than the federal court judges. Building up alliances with our local investigative agencies that have concurrent jurisdiction, trying to get more money for our local investigators so they can do more. So I've been switching a lot of my practice from dealing with solely filing in federal court to also using both the administrative and the state court rationale to get better findings when it comes to things that elected judges will feel more sensitive to, and also to get these stories out in the press about how this affects everyday people and how it affects everyday people. And in a very hostile environment in Florida, it's been pretty successful.
And Matt, rumor has it that there are old people in Florida?
Old people? No, there are a lot of young people. Miami, you know, it's...
Okay.
Well, in our experience in the NFB over these many, many years has been that we have broad bipartisan support, and the reason that is so comes down to the relationships you form with people. As Dan was saying, you know, you might work with the Kiwanis Club. Well, one of their members might become Senator Smith or whatever. And it's finding those relationships, building them, and it's a long-term strategy, but sometimes you find people supporting your issues that if you just were trying to judge them based on being a D or an R, and based on whatever other ideology they might be talking about, you wouldn't think you have the support. But because you have the relationship, they will support you regardless. I mean, it doesn't become about ideology, it becomes about, it's about the relationship.
Remember that some of the most paternalistic legislation we have to deal with came from people who thought they were progressive and on our sides.
Right,
So.
absolutely. Eve, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
What was that?
Oh, yeah, I got more. States, you'll notice, get together every once in a while and they share their litigation strategies and periodically the topic is how to share their litigation strategies to crush us. So at least at some NAG meeting recently, there was something about a topic about how to get DOJ to leave you alone, particularly in Olmstead-based cases, but really in any of them. And the one they came up with was to argue that DOJ has no enforcement power under Title II. And so basically meaning nobody has any enforcement power to enforce Title II or 504 in court, really. And that came up in Florida. Love Florida. Can't imagine why you live there. And then the Florida AG spread it around to his colleagues, and it came up in Georgia in the GNETS case, and it came up in another case. And when people said to me, well, aren't you worried that that DOJ won't continue to argue back against that we do in fact have that authority? And I said, no, nobody gives up authority. They may not, they may not exercise it, but you don't just let someone take it away from you, and now I'm not so sure. That was before I knew who the appointees were going to be. So a cutback on DOJ's authority to enforce Title II would be a real disaster, because damages are a lot easier for DOJ to get, and that would be a real problem. And they have more resources than most of us do to take on the systemic cases. So I'm concerned that argument from DOJ may not be so good. So there may be opportunities for what?
I should find out within the next 60 days whether or not they are going to go in or not. So
yeah,
we're
watching.
It's a 60-day time frame.
We're watching, but there may be times when we're going to have to think very seriously about intervening in DOJ cases.
Ooh.
Filing amicus briefs in DOJ cases, although that's not as powerful as intervening, and not just because DOJ may not seek to maintain its own authority, but also because DOJ may not take all the positions that we want in terms of what relief should be there. So I think it'll be very important to intervene in cases we care about, either on the legal issues or on how they play out. Whether it's a DOJ case that they've just started, or whether it's a case that's already settled and in monitoring, we have to pay attention to those monitors' reports and make noise and intervene if the settlement that your clients are the beneficiaries of aren't being carried out. We'll have to intervene in fairness hearings if settlements go forward that are not compliant with the law, that are not all that the law requires. So there's a lot of work that we'll have to do just watching what DOJ does going forward in those areas. I have more unless people want to comment on that.
Any comments on that?
I would just say, and there are some cases where we are already sort of in, not because we intervened, but because we're co-counsel essentially with DOJ. And so we will have, a way to make arguments, but that's scary too for us.
I'm listening to Eve, and I need to ask you, Mr. Labarre, there is hard liquor served at this event?
It will be available, yes, sir.
I was optimistic yesterday. Today I'm supposed to take a different role. DOJ has been very rigorous at defending any challenges based on sovereign immunity from states and people and other locations that aren't even entitled to sovereign immunity, but have filed a lot of sovereign immunity cases, saying and very regularly and successfully squashing those. I'm not sure that sovereign immunity will be on the top of this administration's list to defend. So we'll have to watch out for those. Luckily, we can probably cut and paste those briefs and file them ourselves. And then the other thing that we were very active in was supporting P&A's rights to access institutions of all kinds, including schools and including workshops and all kinds of things. And that routinely gets challenged everywhere across the country. And if DOJ is either more passive about that or takes a more restrictive view of P&A access, that will be a huge problem for all of us, because they have a much greater ability to go in without discovery to find out what's going on in institutions for people with disabilities.
Any comments from the panel?
I got one more.
All right, he's got another one.
But this one goes on, this is under another question.
Okay, well,
regs,
go ahead.
the reg question, regs. So I think we're less worried about bad regs in the disability area, because the mantra is regs bad, don't regulate. But we prefer no regs to bad regs, and there's possibilities of withdrawing regs. Less risk of withdrawing DOJ regs in the disability field than withdrawing HHS regs and Department of Education regs, all of which is already happening. So some things I've learned from being on the other side of this process are, if you want regs to not happen, the key is delay and oppose. So ask, every time a reg comes out that you don't like, ask for an extension of the time. Ask for a long extension. So I have seen requests for extensions based on the fact that well, our schools are all closed during the summer, and so we can't do anything during that period. And so it will take us 9 months after that to gather all the massive amounts of data that you're going to need to respond to when we respond to this regulation. So early enough on, seek an extension. And having enough people seek an extension should lead to an extension, especially if you have anything like a good reason. And then give them all kinds of stuff. So the thing that makes regulation slow is the agency has to read all the comments, and they should all say something different, if at all possible. And then they have to respond to all of them. So they get to say, 6 comments said this, and we disagree because this. It's harder when all 8,000 comments said the same thing, then they only have to respond once. So say lots of things about this, and they have to then respond. This slows down the reg-making process a lot. So give lots of information. Okay. And we all need to bone up on the Administrative Procedures Act, because while you may be able to pull a guidance down off the website pretty easily, you have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act to take out a regulation. So if any changes to the regs that we like come up, they have to follow those procedures as well. And we have to make sure that they do. And then there are things that, at least the opponents to various guidances argued were such significant guidance that they needed to be put out via notice and comment. And the Justice Department, and I supported this tremendously. The Justice Department said no, they were not significant regs, and so they did not, and they weren't legislative regs, so they didn't have to have notice and comment. But we should look at the regs, any future outgoing guidances very carefully, or any withdrawals of guidance very carefully to see whether they are significant, in which case we can argue that they should go through notice and comment too. So those are some of the things I learned, and that we'll have to make use of.
There was actually a Bush-era OMB bulletin, I think,
still
about
exists.
guidance, right, saying that even the guidance, unless it's
Yes.
simply putting like sort of clarifying former statements, has to go through a notice and comment.
If it's a significant guidance, and there's actually it's not a very broad definition of what's a significant guidance under the OMB circular. It has to go through OMB and interagency process. So if a reg gets out or a guidance gets out in a week, you know it didn't go through that process. That's an OMB circular. It's not that hard to get rid of an OMB circular, but it's been in effect for a very long time, and we have to make sure that that's getting implemented as well.
Who's this?
This is Abby again from Brown Goldstein
Sure.
and Levy. I just had a quick thought, sort of bouncing off what Eve said and what Matt said earlier about the app idea, which is if anybody has connections at these large organizations that circulate these petitions to massive numbers of followers, it might be worth seeing if we can get them on board circulating petitions that will actually be comments to rules that they care about, as opposed to just petitions that go to elected officials that they are sort of instructed to ignore. Mm-hmm. Especially if they circulate with the petition like, please add your own individual spin. I think it's still worth it if MoveOn.org sends 15,000 of the same thing, but if they can convince them to send 15,000 slightly different things,
Mm-hmm.
so much the better.
Okay.
Writing it down.
Thank you, Abby.
Hey, Scott, this is Sasha Sandberg Champion. If
Yes,
I could
sir.
Say, just to respond a little bit to what Eve said, I just wanted to put out there, I've been on the fringes of a small group of lawyers from different fields who are interested in these sort of APA issues and exploring them together. And it turns out there's a bit of an alliance between, for example, environmental groups have a lot of
And they know
this-
how to do it.
They know how to do it. They're experienced APA litigators. I'm not. I've been on the other end with you a little bit, but I certainly have not done that for a living. But I've been hooking up with people who actually know how to do this for a living. So if there's interest in that, I'm certainly happy to hook people up with these ongoing efforts. People like Public Citizen who actually know what they're doing when they file these things. So we don't have to do this in an amateurish way if we're going to be doing it.
I almost feel like, as DRBA, we need to appoint a Trump triage type committee. There's just, my head is spinning with all these things that we need to think about. And, you know, maybe it won't be as bad as we think, but I think we have to be ready for it. Any other comments about this whole regulatory landscape?
Not about that, Scott, but about your last comment.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot that we do that is terribly, terribly important that is not going to preoccupy the Trump administration, is not going to preoccupy them in their spending time fighting us. It would be very good when you talk about Trump triage, it would be very good for us to share everything we know about state law remedies amongst each other, because we're going to have more and more reasons not to be in federal court. But I also think it's important. Hillary spent a lot of time talking about Trump and a lot less about her ideas, and I see that still in the media. I think we can't ignore this, but we have to talk about our ideas and pursue our agenda and not play defense 90% of every day because of this real boogeyman who's in the White House. And what's interesting is I think that this is an area where, to some extent, business and other institutions are actually out of sync with the government. I've been noticing over the last year or so a lot more commercial enterprises being interested in a positive way about accessibility and inclusivity in their workforce, in their products, in their stores. And at least so far, it hasn't occurred to them that the pressure's off because the federal government is going to be crazy and invade every place and tax us poor folks to death and whatever. They seem to still be going forward on disability, and I think we don't want to stop encouraging them and meeting with them because, you know, we're busy making sure that Congressman Jones doesn't introduce another stupid bill. Well, I guess I've said what I wanted to say.
I think that's a good point. And again, it comes down to the relationships.
Scott, this is Lainey.
Yes, go ahead,
Quickly.
Lainey.
First of all, I totally agree with Dan. And ever since the election, I've actually been operating like with a split personality. And I really agree with what you said. I think on the notice thing, which infects the rest of us, it's not just the Chamber of Commerce that is our opponent. We're losing the issue in the court of public opinion.
Yes.
And I've said this for several years, we gotta figure out a way to I can say in the confidentiality of this place that there are lawyers who are filing too many cases and that we can distinguish. And I think in addition, like, I just want to remind people that Jim Harrington, who has been a lifelong disability rights advocate, started an organization in Texas to protect the ADA by helping the recipients of these demand letters. Because it's not just small businesses that are getting them, but all those small businesses have friends and customers who are being infected by this strategy. And our profession, our field has been very lucky that we haven't had these people in it, and now we do. So I think in addition to all the great work you guys are doing in DC to fight these bills, and I agree with everything you said, we need to be able to articulate what's different about those very small handful of lawyers. Like on the website, there's 5 firms that are basically doing all this work and wrecking. And also, it'd be great if you guys could do a list of what remedies already exist to shut down that kind of practice. And we could just have it internally for DRBA, so we can say, we don't need a notification law because we can sanction them, or we could do this, or we could do that. So
Claudia Center's working on that memo now.
yeah, I think that would be really good, because I don't really feel comfortable ignoring it and just talking about, even though I agree with everything you guys said, I think we have to look at the other part of it too.
Is there also a way to frame this as, look, if you put a bunch of loops, a bunch of hoops that I have to go through before I can essentially try and informally resolve my issue with this restaurant, and the regular person on the road doesn't know what those hoops are, we all need lawyers then before we can even start to talk to our to the restaurant that has an access problem. Just the uncertainty of what I have to do to comply with this new set of rules and not face criminal or civil penalties is going to push people to, we know it's going to push people not to complain at all. But if it played out the way it's supposed to, it would actually push people to get lawyers sooner and more often.
Right, and it could create more litigation instead of less.
I have a question for the Californians here. What impact has that Notification Act had, the one in California?
When I left, they hadn't created the accessibility experts that they were supposed to.
Yeah, right. Well, it hasn't decreased the number of lawsuits, but also I think that's because a lot of the things it does are sort of post-lawsuit filing. So.
In terms of looking at the bill, maybe there should also be something along the lines of a plan B in the event that it actually does come forward. And if you look at all the other discrimination statutes, they do provide for damages, and including punitive and compensatory. And to me, if you're going to give somebody notice and they don't do what they're supposed to do, that should be punitive damages right there, because you've told them, they have knowledge of it, and they should be doing it. So then make Title III equal to Title I.
Say, okay, we'll take this.
Yeah,
you
I
get
mean,
damages at the end.
If they want to do the whole, we're trying to protect, then at least get something if we're gonna lose something. Just a thought. And the other question.
And who is this, by the way? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm Glenn Parker from Parker Hansky. The other question I had, and maybe I'm missing something, but I thought Trump had this 2-for-1 rule
Yeah.
with legislation, and that
With
any
regulation.
Regulation.
I'm sorry. So would this be considered a regulation that would fall within that?
Not a reg, it's a statute.
It would
It's a
just be,
statute, all right. Because it does add costs. This education portion of it does add costs, and I thought you weren't going to be introducing anything that added costs, but okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. All right, so our time is.
This is second time Carla's comment.
Yeah, Carla's.
This
made
is
two
Carla.
Carla,
Gilbride.
go ahead.
I've got a question and a comment.
Sure.
I don't know, maybe they're both comments. Comment and suggestion. So my comment, what you said about, this is going to lead to more litigation, it reminds me of IDEA, and I'm sure there are other statutes. That's the one that came to mind. I think this is a good discussion point to push back on, where you get into all sorts of ancillary litigation about whether you've exhausted your administrative remedies, whether you've, stepped through all the proper hoops procedurally, and then that's going to clog the courts up, over whether that happened. And so I think that's, a good data point. And then speaking of data, that's my other sort of suggestion. When we were talking about, the app and people telling their stories, I think that's incredibly important, to put human faces on it. But I also think that we're currently losing the data war, because they can say, oh, well, 80% of the cases were brought by, that, don't result in, just fees or whatever. They have numbers and statistics that they can point to. Obviously, we can drill further into those statistics, and I thought that Dan's comment about, were the barriers actually rectified at these places that got sued is an important question. But forget about the places that are getting sued. If we could just do some surveys, how many businesses, are inaccessible in town X or county Y? What percentage of stores have barriers? We don't have to talk about lawsuits, but we can show the ongoing non-compliance, and I think that's really important to sort of change the framing about how persistent a problem this is. The problem isn't the lawsuits, the problem is the non-compliance with the law.
That's a good point, Carla, thank you.
This is Rick McPherson.
Yes, sir.
I have a question, and I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference because what I'm seeing, at least in Minnesota, is this push for notification isn't based on facts or logic. It just has to do with politicians responding to pressure from small communities. But having said that, I have a question. The Minnesota statute, and it sounds like Florida too, creates this new body of professionals that the businesses go to get some kind of letter. Now, the underlying premise for a lot of the notification stuff is this is costing businesses money where they're paying the plaintiff's lawyers. I don't want to be cynical, but it seems to me we're just shifting. I mean, if I'm a business person, I'm now shifting who I'm paying money to. And I'm very curious what the experience of people in Florida or California where this new cottage industry has been set up. What's the experience? What's the cost? Does it really work? I've told a couple people, friends of mine who were defending like a small bar who happened to be a friend who got one of these letters. I've said to them, look at what the cost is going to be. It's not going to cost very much to fix the problem. These drive-by folks, even in a state like Minnesota where there's a damage remedy, look at the business model. If folks fix the problem and go to court and say, you know, look, this has been taken care of, what's the remedy for the plaintiff's attorney? You're going to go to try and get damages because you couldn't get into the bathroom once? And that'll be, I mean, I know the problem is bigger than that, but that'll be the way it's presented to a jury. How much money is a jury going to award for that? In most cases, as a business model for a plaintiff's lawyer who's doing these kinds of cases, it falls apart. You're not going to get much money. But shifting to this new cottage industry and paying people a lot of money to do opinion letters, it's just going to continue to cost the business money. And so I'm curious, is it working out the way I think it is?
In Florida, they haven't implemented yet. It hasn't been passed. My assumption is that these experts, this new cottage industry of experts, will not be able to understand what readily achievable is, and because of that, they're going to have an issue with the validity of their reports if they do go to trial. Also, Florida does not have a private right of action similar to the UNRU or whatever thing. So there's no damages. It's only injunctive relief.
This is Andy Mudrick from California. So I have a couple points. So the disability community negotiated this certified access specialist in California as kind of a compromise to the this issue, and I actually don't think it's been a horrible thing. It allows businesses to get some protection if they ensure that their sites are accessible, under these standards, which is actually a good thing. I also don't think the notification isn't the end of the world. We're still filing lawsuits. We just, we notify businesses ahead of time, which we always did anyway. And I guess my third point is, I think we're really missing something about the message. I mean, and kind of going to Dan's point about we are just on the defensive at this point, And we've completely lost the argument about access being a civil right and people with disabilities having, having the right to equal access under the law. And I think we have to go back to that, figure out how to message that in a way that's not just defending against lawsuits.
Can I follow up on what Andrew said?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Dan.
Other than welcome as the new DRA director, we're all very excited about what you're going to do. But you've also given me the courage to ask the question, which is how well has, on physical barriers, how well has Title III worked? Because maybe we need to be thinking about other ways of dealing with this. I'm no expert on it. I think my partner Joe Espo back there probably knows more, but in Maryland, the sue the landlord over the lead paint and its horrible effect on the child was not causing an improvement in the housing and any real lead paint abatement. And so then, funds were set aside for abatement certification programs were set up, et cetera. And it makes me wonder whether what we should be thinking about on a state-by-state level is, for Mr. Tiny Retailer or Mrs. Tiny Retailer to have access to a fund to, getting ready to make improvements, how do I, do this accessibly, et cetera, that we may be defending something that's not working terribly well. I don't know.
I think also I would just say notice, means different things, and notice in the California law, as I understand it, is pretty different than how it would work in these federal bills, and California doesn't prevent you from enforcing your rights in the way that it does in the federal bills.
On a Title III access or what's effective or not, in my experience, just kind of an observational level, the variance is community by community, and the most effective places are ones that have a building inspector who enforces. And New York City, we don't have that. They get fired every couple of years because they're on the take. And then Title III is the only, and the human rights laws and others are the only things that are there otherwise. But, despite New York City starting with one before the ADA, the change is not as, substantial. I was in upstate New York in the Catskills in a small little community skiing, this past winter many times, and every business in town has a ramp and, has something resembling a bathroom, but that's the building inspector.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end here, and I just want to see if we can spend a couple of minutes. And first of all, I want to say to Eve Hill here, what an outstanding job she did before the Judiciary Committee. Was that last week, I guess? Yes, last week. And speaking of that, what are we going to do about the judges that we are likely going to get? Eve, any thoughts?
I think we're gonna have to start going to judicial conferences and getting ourselves invited. So I, ages and ages ago, went to a conference of chief justices, and I did my ADA pick a disability, and this is not one where you put on a blindfold or get in a wheelchair or anything like that. But it is an interactive thing about what it means to have a disability and what your inherent prejudices are against people with disabilities and what you think a disability means and all these things. And I had my hair up at the time, and everybody told me it was great. And then I went and I took my hair down and I put on my bathing suit and I went to go to the pool by the hotel. And I happened to get in the elevator, and these two guys behind me were talking about, oh my God, that thing on Pick a Disability really opened my eyes. I think I screwed up this case I just did. And I'm like, okay, maybe this works. But I think getting to judges about this, no, We're not asking you to feel sorry for us. And in order for us to be covered under the ADA, it doesn't have to mean you feel sorry for us. That is not the test. So, Judge Gorsuch, when I have multiple sclerosis and I'm still doing my job and my boss refuses to promote me to the job that I'm actually already doing temporarily because I might need leave time sometime in the future, I should be able to challenge that because I have a disability even though I can still do my job. That's who this was supposed to protect. And then 3 days later, you write an opinion saying, well, you needed leave time, so you are not qualified to do your job. In order to have a disability, you have to be unable to do your job, but if you can't do your job, you're not qualified to do your job. That is not what the ADA meant. And really, they haven't grasped that at all. They think of people with disabilities as those poor people that can't work, and not as people who are being unfairly prevented from doing work. And I think that's just so much of the work that we need to do. And I think Dan's point about new allies, states can say, okay, y'all limited the ADA, we reject that for our state law, for our state disability rights law. We reject that for our state consumer protection law. We reject that. We reject any number of things. And then I'm going to filibuster for just a minute, because nobody else will. Exploit the bottlenecks. So we should continue. People have asked me, should we continue to send cases to DOJ about disability rights? Should we continue to send cases to the Office for Civil Rights? And I say yes. I don't think we should send them the cases that are groundbreaking in a legal way. They're probably not going to be able to move those to break the ground. But if they don't have lots of cases, individual bread and butter cases, like every inaccessible building in the city of New York, file a complaint, it's not hard, then those people won't have enough work to do. And that from the new Trump executive order that says cut agencies that don't have important work to do, get cut. And it's really hard to build an agency back up in a new administration and get all those people trained up. So they've got to be busy. They ideally are busy working on cases that everybody would think were, discrimination and someone was treated wrong and we can't tolerate that, and resolving them. And they're perfectly capable of doing that. They're capable of doing groundbreaking things, but probably won't be allowed to do it. So we got to keep them busy. We got to have backlogs with them so that they don't get cut. And then the things that bottleneck are things that have to be responded to and that have deadlines. Get your congressperson to send them letters. The letters have deadlines and they have to be responded to. So you've got a lot of people that suddenly have to write a lot of letters to Congress following up on the complaint that you sent to DOJ 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard back about my complaint. Believe me, you have no idea how many letters I got like that. And they have to be reviewed by the people in the front office at the Civil Rights Division, which means they're not reading the really crappy statement of interest that they're about to write to undermine the law, okay? So exploit the bottlenecks. The other thing that has deadlines and have to be answered are FOIA requests. Anything you're curious about? Ask. Submit a FOIA request. And ask for meetings. So we don't have a head of civil rights. We don't know who that's going to be. We don't have an associate attorney general, although now there's a rumor for that. But Jeff Sessions is there. Let's go have a meeting with him. Half the time when you guys came to meet with me, I was like, I can't say anything, but I'm already working on this, and I might have it done yet already if I wasn't meeting with you. So they take the meetings. They were all informative, really, none of you. They take the meetings, you lay out your things to them, you reframe them maybe even in ways they can understand. This is about job creation. This is about infrastructure. Infrastructure makes things accessible. You like that. And the things that you're going to come out in force and chain yourselves to the gates on if they don't take into account. All useful information that they should know about what you might do to them. But mostly, there's an hour of their time they didn't spend writing a bad reg.
So, Scott, I have to tell you that I have a problem with the premise of your question.
Okay.
I can count the number of times I've been in front of a Clinton appointment judge, a Obama appointment
Yeah, this is
judge,
not new.
who feels very sorry for my client and proceeds to screw me over. And I've been in front of Bush appointees who are looking and thinking, I don't want to pay taxes to fund disability income, payments to this person. I don't want this person on the welfare rolls. We're trial lawyers. We don't get to pick our audience. It's our job to communicate to whoever our audience is. So if we get a case and the judge is a Trump appointee, God, it hurts to say that, I think my tongue's gonna fall out, is a Trump appointee, then your job is to go in and say, if this person were still working at X company, as we think you should require, that person over the next 40 years will earn Y amount of income, be paying Z amount of taxes, and is going to be contributing to the economy by buying food and shelter and da-da-da-da-da. However, if the defendant prevails, here's how much the social programs are going to cost to support this person for the next 40 years. Know your audience, and we believe, I think we do, I think we believe there's an economic case for inclusion. So if the language is one of dollars and cents, let's use the language of dollars and cents and keep winning.
But those aren't the judges that Trump's going to appoint. They're the ones who just read the law and ignore the parts that they don't like. They don't make policy. Gorsuch didn't make policy. He just read the law and he said, okay, I buy that part and I'm going to ignore the whole rest of it.
But, I guess what I'm saying is we've never won them all. We won't win them all. But there are ways. Well, one way to lose is to go in thinking this judge is my enemy.
Yes.
Right.
And this judge is not going to do justice. What is it they call them? You've got to suspend disbelief.
Right.
And go in as though you have a chance of winning, but tailor it to that judge.
Right. All right, well, let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you, Dan, Matt, Jennifer, and Eve.
Jennifer's got a last word.
Oh, Jennifer, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, let's not forget, I think, the change that, we can do on our own as sort of private litigants. We, spend a lot of time thinking about the role of the agencies, and it has been critically important, and I think we've gotten used to over the last 8 years also having, phenomenal support from DOJ that really pushes the law, and certainly from other agencies as well. We're sort of very DOJ focused here, for EEOC and HHS, and HUD. But before that, yes, I think there, it's troubling when the agencies are going to do harmful things to us, but certainly we have spent a lot of our lives creating change without the agencies when they're not there for us.
Yep.
And we can't forget, what it was like before we had the Obama administration
Right.
doing all of these fabulous things.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yay.
Yep.
So we need to have a quick business meeting because we certainly don't want to stand in the way between here and the bar. And so, first of all, I want to know, is Alexis Alvarez in the room? I wonder if you would like to take just a minute to talk about the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force that we now have, or we've actually had for a few years, but you're now going to start heading that, as I understand it.
That is the case. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis Alvarez. I'm from Legal Aid at Work in California, formerly known as the Legal Aid Society Employment Law Center. I joined the diversity task force about mid-year last year, headed by Michelle Uzetta, who is now going to be focusing on the West Coast symposium. So I don't know how many of you attended last year, but it was a great program, and she plans on carrying that on into the future, and is so going to be directing her energies there. So in talking with her about the diversity task force and the things I was interested in, one of the things that I'd really like to see, and we've been talking about a lot, I think, is building alliances and talking about intersectionality and using our commonalities to build strength as a community. And so that is an area that I'd really like to focus on, and to start building more connections with other bar associations, and that we're taking into account all aspects of our identities. And I'd be really happy to hear from those of you who are interested in that as well, or who have any other ideas for the diversity task force. I'm going to be at the reception, and I'm also on the listserv, so please feel free to reach out, and I'm also happy to talk more one-on-one. But I'm really excited about this, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Alexis. Speaking of the West Coast Conference, we are in fact going to have another one this year. I'm not sure, do you know, Alexis, or anybody else, whether we've figured out the date and the place? Anybody know?
I don't know. I think it's still early planning stages. It's going to be the fall, probably October, September, and I think we're looking at the Bay Area. I'm on the planning committee with Michelle and Andrew Lee from Schools and Morgan.
And that's Jasmine? Is that Jasmine?
Sorry, I'm just randomly yelling. Kara Jansen.
Kara, okay. Great. And so obviously just stay tuned to the listserv, and we'll get information out as soon as we can. I have a brief financial report of DRBA. This is for the year 2016. In membership fees, we collected $19,025. Contributions and donations, such as many of the donations that your firms have made and organizations, and the National Federation of the Blind, at $25,000 a year. The total of all those donations are $49,350. And then, of course, we've got a whole bunch of expenses. And what I can do is, I think, post all of this on the listserv. But basically, our total revenues were $69,000. Our total expenses were a little over $50,000. So for the last year, we were actually in the, had net revenue of about $19,000. So DRBA is doing well financially. We were able to, a lot of we spend roughly $50,000 a year on related staff support through BBI and the services that we get from the Burton Blatt Institute. We spent about total of $6,000 on the West Coast Conference. And then, of course, we spend some money on supporting people to come to this meeting. So that's how we use our money. And again, thanks to all the sponsors of not only this meeting, but generally speaking, supporting DRBA throughout the year. And let's see, the other thing I wanted to talk about is we will be having elections for our board soon. The board is a self-electing board. Currently, I think we have around 15 members on the board. We can have up to 20, according to our bylaws. And I want to encourage people to get on the board and help direct the organization. I am going to appoint in this coming week a board development committee. That's what our bylaws require us to do. And there needs to be 3 people who are not on the current board from the membership to serve on this committee. So if you're interested in serving on the Board Development Committee, please let me know. And what I mean by that is don't tell me tonight at the cocktail reception, because I don't know that I'll remember. So just send me an email, please, if you're interested in serving on that committee. And by the way, even if you're, even if you're interested in a board position and are not currently on the board, you can serve on this committee as well. So I really encourage people, A, to think about serving on the board, and B, please help us out on this board development committee. I don't have any other notes.
Scott, it's Linda.
Yes. I was just going to ask you, Linda, if you had any announcements or.
See, again, we're on the same wavelength. One more thing about the board. We're also going to be having officer elections. So if you're interested in really moving into a leadership position, you should let Scott know that as well. And the board development committee will put together a slate of officers to take positions in the next term. I just got an email from Michelle Uzeda about the West Coast Conference. The location is going to be the California Endowment in the greatest city in the country, Oakland. They're brand new facilities, so Michelle is still waiting for date confirmation, but we're expecting the date to fall in the first 2 weeks of October. We're shooting for the 6th or the 13th of October, and a save the date will issue soon once the date is confirmed. So,
perfect.
West Coast Conference, Northern California this year. Is that 6th and the 13th? Boy, I have no idea. No, I have a wedding on October 14th. They're Fridays, okay. I have a wedding October 14th. And then you can spend the weekend in the Bay Area.
There you go. So once again, I want to thank, anything else, Linda? Any other announcements from anybody?
That's it, Scott.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank
Sorry, it's Michael Gilbert. I had a couple quick questions. First, how would we get a list of who is a DRBA member? Because I never know if someone's a member or not. So if we're trying to get people to be members, how do we know who's actually a member?
Okay, I guess it's on the website.
The website's not very good. It's very poorly designed. I don't know who designed it, but that would be something I'd suggest is improving the website and honestly, after today, improving the social media presence of the DRBA.
Sure, it's something I thought about as well. I think what we can do, and if you would send me an email because I'll forget otherwise, we can get the roster and just we'll put it on the listserv. We now have this practice where once we have new members, we announce who the new members are and say a little bit about them as sort of a welcoming gesture. But maybe it wouldn't hurt once in a while to put the whole roster on the listserv, just so people know.
The other thing I was going to suggest, and I don't know where you are with this, because I've heard this with a lot of organizations I'm involved with, is to really be professional, is that to hire an executive director if it can be done financially.
Well, now that's an interesting question. One thing that we have talked about is right now we're not organized in terms of being a nonprofit. So one thought is to actually organize ourselves into a nonprofit. Right now we are paying the Burton Blatt Institute to handle a lot of our administrative functions. So they're
kind of staff consultants, something to that effect.
So we can think about this. It would definitely take a stronger fundraising effort, I think, because right now we bring in roughly $70,000 a year, which isn't much in terms of if you're thinking about having an executive director and your own staff and all that. Right. But those are things I would love to talk about and keep dreaming about and eventually build, but we're not there right now.
That's fine. On one other announcement, if you know where Dan Goldstein's briefcase is, please give it to him.
Hey, Scott, this is Lainey. I have one last question for the board, and I don't want to put it on the list for the following reason. I think we all need to be a little more mindful about how we use the list, because there's been so many emails, things like if you want to congratulate someone or thank someone or agree with someone, I'd just like to ask us all to just give it an extra 5 seconds to see if it needs to go out to 200 people. And maybe the board at the next meeting could come up with some rough guidelines. I don't mean like rules or anything, but the list has really, for me, become so overwhelming that I find I'm missing content in the and the congrats. And I'm hesitant to bring it up because I love that we all like feel like we love each other, and that's really good. But we need to like somehow get the list back to more focus. So if the board could put some guidelines on that, that'd be great.
Okay. I agree with you, and I think we can definitely do that. So thank you, Lainey. All right, any other announcements before we adjourn? All right, we are adjourned. Let's go to the reception.